The National Czechoslovak Museum and Library has identified 3 struggles for freedom. And the first struggle for freedom was to get out from under the empire. There had been a long-standing nationalist movement that led up to World War I. And the Czechoslovaks were part of this. They didn't want to be governed by somebody whose birthright it was to rule them. They wanted to follow more of what was happening in the United States with free elections where people were able to choose their own leader, and that leader can come from any class. So one of the primary leaders of this movement in the political world was Tomas Masaryk. Masaryk was half Slovak, half Czech. He was a law professor, and he traveled widely to Czech and Slovak enclaves around the world, lobbying for them to remember the family and friends they left behind and encouraging them to send their support for a free and independent Czechoslovak state. But he was also wise enough to know that there would need to be a major catalyst for this event to occur. And that catalyst occurred when World War I broke out in 1914. This 800-pound bronze statue of Tomas Masaryk has quite a history to it. It was created in 1937, and as you can see, he's quite pensive in this. In fact, one of the things we often do is encourage some of our visitors to strike the pose and embody Masaryk. But this was created in 1937, and it was intended to be in the town square. But then in 1938, when Nazi Germany marched into Czechoslovakia, this 800-pound bronze became something appealing to the Nazis because it could be melted down and used for munitions. So the statue was hidden 3 times during the course of World War II. It was buried and then dug up and reburied. They did this 3 times to protect this bronze statue. So it survived the war intact. But then in 1948, the communists came to power. And Masaryk was such a staunch supporter of democracy that he became an icon that was anti-communist. So again, the health and welfare of the statue was threatened. However, it was not looked upon as something to be melted down, and instead what happened to it was confiscated and hidden away during the communist era. Now the family lost track of this and ended up immigrating to the United States. But in the late 1960s, there was an article written about some of the Masaryk statues that were in hiding, and the owner claimed this statue, and then it was granted permission to come to California. Stayed in California for a while before it was finally given to the NCSML. Now, a couple little tidbits about Masaryk that you may not know. Tomas Masaryk married an American, Charlotte Gehrig. Upon their marriage, he, who was not born with a middle name, took her maiden name as his middle name. And so the family were known as the Gehrig Masaryks. Tomas and Charlotte had 4 children. All of them were Gehrig Masaryks. Masaryk was an early proponent for women's suffrage, and women had the right to vote in Czechoslovakia before they had the right to vote in the United States. So oftentimes you'll hear me give a tour and talk about Masaryk being a BSD, and BSD in this case stands for Big Stinkin' Deal, because he is. This is the father of Czechoslovakia. The second struggle for freedom that we identified came in 1938 with the advent of World War II. So what happened? Well, the Nazis came to power in Germany, and Adolf Hitler started to talk about there were ethnic Germans living in Czechoslovakia, and he thought that those ethnic Germans were being mistreated, and that land that they were living on in the Sudeten lands should come back to Germany. He thought it was an unfair carving up post-World War I of Europe, that Germany was shorted in their territory, and he was looking to reclaim some of that land. But in order to make a stronger case, he started stirring a pot about how the ethnic Germans living in Czechoslovakia were being mistreated and abused. He got a few others who became passionate about his cause living in Czechoslovakia to also stir the pot internally. And all of a sudden there was a debate about the Sudeten lands. Czechoslovakia wanted to hold on to the land, Germany wanted it back. So on September 29th in 1938, there was a conference in Munich, and it was at the table were the English, the French, and the Germans. The Czechs and the Slovaks were not invited to participate in this debate. They were in the hotel, but they were not at the table. What came out of this was the Munich Agreement, in which Chamberlain, Daladier, and Hitler agreed that portions of Czechoslovakia could indeed go back to Germany. Chamberlain claimed that it was going to lead to peace in our time. What they were trying to do was avert a world war. Nobody wanted a second world war. Unfortunately, what happened was the Sudetenlands came back to Germany, and Hitler saw this as an opportunity to go to Poland, and that's when World War II broke out. So during World War II, Czechoslovakia was divided. You have the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia that lobbied against Hitler. They were not in favor of Nazi Germany's initiatives, but they were occupied. They were occupied, but they were out with the Allied forces. And then you have the First Republic of Slovakia. And the First Republic of Slovakia did align themselves with the Axis powers. Father Josef Tiso was the president of Slovakia. He agreed to the Nuremberg laws. He persecuted the Jewish population living within Slovakia, but he did something that no other Axis power did. When it came time to, after the Jews had been ghettoized and they were now economically draining to the state because they were still people that needed even the very, very basics, and it wasn't good, clothing, housing, and food. They were costing the state too much. And Tiso asked Hitler to help him with the expenses of taking care of these Jews who, due to the Nuremberg laws, were no longer allowed to work and earn their own money. Hitler didn't want that burden either. He was already paying to house and feed millions of Jews throughout Europe. And so Tiso struck a bargain. He paid Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party to remove the Jews from Slovakia. No other country did that. So this has long caused a bit of a shadow of anti-Semitism to be prevalent in a country where prior to World War II there really was none. The Jewish population and the Christian population and the freethinker population lived side by side as neighbors, as partners, and this anti-Semitic fervor was not rampant until the First Republic of Slovakia. At the end of World War II, Czechoslovakia is liberated, predominantly by the Red Army. There was an agreement struck that the Americans could only go as far as Pilsen, which is in western Bohemia, and the Red Army could liberate the rest of Czechoslovakia. This happened in 1945.